Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. This week I tackled building this. A Montessori inspired freestanding-ish wardrobe for my son. And I did it with basic tools, entry-level techniques, and at a fraction of the price that it would have been to buy one of these. If you want to see how I did it, well, let's get going. Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Zach, this is Woodworking, and thank you so much for hopping on the channel and checking out the video. As I said, this week I tackled building this. It's a Montessori inspired wardrobe for my almost 2-year-old son. Or I guess, depending on when you're watching this, maybe he's already 2? Maybe he's off to college. Anyway, my wife and I are actually expecting our second child in the next month or 2, so we figured we'll move our toddler into this room, make it a little bit more toddler appropriate. And, you know, with our little guy, he's almost 2, he's getting more independent. He, much like myself, is pretty close to being able to dress himself in the morning. So we figured we'd build him this. This way we can load it up with some clothes options and he can choose what he wants to wear that day. Or he could, you know, push everything to the side and just use it as another surface to climb and jump off of. Looks good though, right? So when we first thought of putting one of these in here, we did like anyone else does and go online and see how much they are. And what we found were the prices of these units are astronomical. Hundreds and hundreds of dollars, not even including shipping. So like any good husband, I said, I can build that, add it to the list. I figured there's probably many people out there like me who want to tackle a project like this. So I figured I'd build this with some basic tools, some basic techniques, and hopefully at a small fraction of the cost. So if you're interested, follow along with the video and you can see everything I did, everything I did wrong, and basically just do the opposite. Stay tuned to the end of the video and I'll do a full cost breakdown on what it costs to build this unit, and you can compare that against maybe buying one. See what the better option is. And if you see anything that you like while you're watching the video, feel free to click that little like button and, you know, consider subscribing to the channel. Hope to be putting out a video every week or 2 of some different projects I'm working on, so make sure you click that little bell notification icon so you get notified the next time I drop a video. And like always, thank you again for the support, and let's get into it. Before we get into the video, I do have to apologize in advance. As you'll hear throughout most of it, I sound like I've got a cold.
Before I start, I just want to say that I have a cold.
Well, as I said, we have a 2-year-old who's in daycare, and so basically we're in just a constant state of colds and flu bugs, so great. Okay, so we will start this process off like I do most. That's in SketchUp, mocking up the design. I like to use SketchUp both because it's easy to modify things, change shapes, change sizes, dimensions, etc., and make edits, and also because my handwriting and drawing looks like a 2-year-old, and so using paper is probably not the best option for me. So over to SketchUp. So this is going to be the wardrobe. Really kind of 2 main cavities. We've got the left-hand side, which as you can see has a bit of a closet bar for hanging clothes, and then the right-hand side here with some shelves. So I'm going to try to keep this fairly simple design and fairly simple build project, like I said earlier. We also want to make sure it's nice and sturdy because my son is part monkey and likes to climb. And so we're going to be building this with pocket screws and glue for the most part. So I like to use this software. It's Optimalon, something like that. You can see the name there, optimalon.com. It's their online panel cutter or optimizer or something along those lines. I googled it, I found it, it's free to use and it's easy to use, and I've been using it for years. So here you can see I've already pre-listed out all the parts. So once you're ready, you hit start calculation and bada bing bada boom, and we're done. So we can go in to see our results. So you can see here all of that is just going to use one piece. It's going to be 10 parts, use about 64% of a sheet of plywood. So to get started, I had to start to break down my sheet goods for this project, going with a 3/4 inch maple plywood. And as you can see, as I struggle to get that up onto the sawhorses, it was not light. Normally I would prefer to lay this out on top of a rigid piece of foam insulation board, and be able to cut it off into my various pieces on the ground, both to reduce any chance of any chip out on the underside, as well as to give myself a nice solid surface to work off of. Unfortunately, I didn't have that on hand at this point, so I went with the sawhorses. Well, it'd be ideal if I would be able to utilize a track saw for this, but unfortunately I am not rich, and so I went with the regular old circular saw. Now I did try out for the first time the Craig Rip Cut jig, so I got that all attached to my saw. It took a little bit of maneuvering just to get things lined up and make sure everything was aligned with the mark, and you'll see a couple times I readjusted that to dial it in, but overall I think it worked well. So once I got that first strip cut off, I got ready to start breaking down the remaining piece of the sheet of plywood into my various pieces. I got the jig all sort of dialed in. Kind of had an issue here and then realized that there was actually a staple sticking out of the factory edge, so got that out of the way so that my jig would glide smoothly, and then got set to cutting all the pieces. And we cut and cut and cut, and then we basically had it all and then we cut some more, and I think maybe that was it. No, we did more cutting, and it never seemed to stop. I just kept cutting pieces. And it wouldn't be a real woodworking video if I didn't have a slow motion clip of me clearing the sawdust off of my workspace. Unfortunately, genius move here, left my saw there, so basically just ended up putting all that sawdust back on my saw and needing to clean it off again. So once I got that cleaned off, I finished up trimming out the last few of the pieces of plywood down to their final dimensions. Now, I'm in Canada. It's mid-February. There's a few feet of snow on the ground, as you can see, and it's about minus 20 degrees Celsius outside. So you may be wondering, what is this moron doing, breaking down his sheet goods outside instead of using his shop? Well, first, I do like a challenge, and so I figured, let's try to break this down without being able to feel my hands and see how that goes. But the other reason is I've got a unique situation with my shop, in that I don't have one. But, spoiler alert, I do have a future plan to address that, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell icon so you get notified when that future video drops. Working outside in the cold isn't too bad. I mean, could be worse. Could be snow. Oh, right. Well, as the white stuff started to fall from the sky, I figured I would bust out the sander and start to tackle every woodworker's favorite part of any project, and that's sanding everything down. Well, realistically here I'm really just knocking down the edges. With all the cuts, it left some pretty sharp edges to all the pieces, and like I said, since this is going to be a wardrobe that's going to go in my son's room, I figured I'd knock those sharp edges down first before we got into drilling out the pocket screws and before we did any kind of assembly. Now, I will be doing a final sanding in the future before we do any kind of finishing, but like I said, for now, we're just knocking those edges down. So once I had all those edges knocked down, next up I took out my Craig pocket hole jig and got started drilling out the holes. So as I mentioned before, in the design, I did indicate where I wanted those pocket holes, so I did go back and forth and reference that design, just to make sure that I drilled those in the right spots on each individual piece to minimize seeing them in the finished product. Lots of different ways you could make this, different types of joinery you could use. Like I said before, we're keeping this build fairly straightforward, and one that doesn't require a lot of advanced skills or tools. Alright, so now that we have got all of our pieces cleaned up, dried out, sanded, The weather's warmed up a little bit, ready to start our assembly. So like I said earlier, we're going to use all the pocket holes that we drilled, as well as a little bit of glue, just to make sure it's nice and sturdy. So we're going to start sort of upside down, because we've kind of drilled these pocket holes in such a way that we want them to be hidden as much as possible. So I've got my bottom piece here upside down, and I've got my toe kick, so we're going to start with that. Now I'm going to set that back about 3/4 of an inch. Again, we don't need really a true toe kick on this, but just going to set it back a little bit. So I've got marks here and here, about 3/4 inch back from either side. So we've got it there. As you can see, a few screws there we're going to pop in. Okay, now that we've got our bottom assembly together, I've got one of my outside edge pieces here. I'm just going to make sure that's nice and secure to my workstation. That doesn't move anywhere on me. So those pocket holes on this edge are what's going to attach our top eventually. But we're going to start with the bottom. So I've gone ahead and made a couple of reference lines here, just because those are 3 inches, same height as our toe kick, so that we can make sure that as we line this up with the bottom here and our front piece here and our back piece here, that we are perfectly square. So we're good there, there, and there. Okay. So I got some clamps all ready to go, so looks good on the dry fit. We'll go ahead and spread a bit of glue on the edge. All right, so we've got our bottom assembly all together here, so we're ready to put on our second piece, our second end piece. So again, I'm going to orient it there so that our pocket holes are up. Just going to do a quick dry fit here again, making sure that we are nice and square. And I did already put reference line on the top and on the bottom here, so I'll be able to make sure that we're lined up. Okay, so we should be good there. Once I got those side pieces attached, I flipped it over and put my center divider in. This will separate the closet bar section from the shelf section. And pro tip here, rather than trying to measure the exact width of the shelves, you can see here I've clamped in one of my shelf pieces. So this way, when I butt that center divider up, it will be the exact width of the shelf material, and I won't potentially risk putting it a little too snug or leaving a small gap. So once the bottoms of all the vertical pieces were connected, I flipped everything over and then began working on the top. And as you can see here, as I dry fit this in place, I'm going to measure a couple spots to ensure that I leave myself 3/4 of an inch. If you recall from the design earlier, that 3/4 of an inch is to accommodate that back brace piece that will allow us to secure this to the wall to avoid it toppling over when it inevitably becomes a climbing gym. So then I got everything clamped up and ready to go. And as you've seen throughout the video, I've been using these pipe clamps. These are the 3/4 inch Bessie pipe clamps. I've had this set for a little over 10 years now, and they still work flawlessly. Highly recommend these, and I'll drop a link in the video description below, along with some of the other tools I've used throughout the build. So a quick check of square, make sure everything was aligned, and then I got set to getting the back brace in place. So the final step was to stand our carcass up and start to put our shelves in place. And as you'll see as I go here, I was measuring the height of each of these shelf cavities to align the shelves where they needed to go. Now, had I been smarter, what I should have done would have saved me a little bit of time and made things a little bit more accurate, which actually cut some spacer blocks. And then I could have put those in place and ensured that every space between the shelves was exactly the same and saved me the step of having to measure each one each time. So once I had all the shelves in place, I double checked my measurements and the assembly of the carcass was pretty much done. Ready to move on to the final stage, filling some pocket holes, getting my edge banding in place, and then more sanding. Okay, so we've got everything together and just need to go back through, and on a few spots where we have the pocket holes from the screws that will be visible, I do want to kind of plug those up just to make sure that those aren't obviously visible in the final product. Again, some on the underside on the bottom of the base will be hidden, so not to worry about those ones, but there are a few. Alright, so while we wait for that glue to dry on those plugs, I'm going to go ahead and get started on some of the edge banding. I've got my top piece in place already. I'm just going with a roll of adhesive back edge banding, real wood. Went with maple to match the maple plywood. So once all the edge banding was in place and the glue on the plugs had dried, I carried the unit back outside. Using a flush trim saw, I trimmed those plugs down flush with the surface and then began to sand everything down once again. So really focusing on the edges where I trimmed up the edge banding, and it might have been a little bit sharp, so just making those nice and smooth, as well as any of the spots where I had trimmed up the plugs, made sure to give those a good sanding as well. Finally, I just went around the unit, touched up any of the remaining edges that were a little sharp, and then we were ready to move on to starting to assemble the closet bar. Okay, so final step in the build is to get our closet bar, which will be made up of a 1-inch hardwood dowel mounted. So what I've decided to do here is to cut out some circles. This will be cut out of plywood, 3/4 inch, and that's going to have a hole in a 1-inch hole in the middle. So that will slide right through, and those will be what mounts it. It'll make more sense when we get it secured, but basically this is going to be my template for those two end pieces. That way this is removable if it ever were to break. So first things first, I decided on a 3-inch circle. It's a 1-inch dowel, so I thought 3 inches was an appropriate size. So it just so happened that the internal dimensions of this roll of tape are exactly 3 inches. So use that as a circle, cut that out with my jigsaw out of this 1/4 inch MDF, and then just sanded it nice and flush right up to my line. So next thing is I'm going to cut out a couple of squares of plywood, trim them up as close as possible, and then we'll route them flush with this flush trim bit. So once I got those two circles cut out, I then clamped them together, and using a 1-inch spade bit, drilled out a center hole in both, and made sure to have the scrap piece of plywood underneath just to prevent any tear out. Sanded up the edges nice and smooth, and then proceeded to start to drill out 4 holes. So drilled some pilot holes for 4 screws that would go in each of these 2 circles. And like I said earlier, I plan to screw these in place. That way the closet bar itself is removable if it ever got broken and needed to be replaced. You know, if someone was to swing on it or something. So once that closet bar assembly was done, I brought it over to the carcass and screwed it in place. Checked my measurements a couple times, used one of my son's hangers to make sure it was in the right spot, and then screwed it in on both ends. And with that, this build was done. This was all ready now to be carried up to my son's room and put in place ready for the big reveal. And he was super excited to see it. He came running in his room in excitement. He checked out everything, quickly found a spray bottle, and immediately left without even looking at it. So on take 2, we directed him to the closet where he loved to, climb and swing on the bar. Seems like somebody predicted this. As promised, I will do a breakdown of the cost for this build, starting with the plywood. Now, I did have a leftover sheet, so mine was free, but if I was to buy it, a sheet of maple plywood, it's about $104 where I am. The edge banding was about $8 worth. The dowel for the closet bar was about $5, and miscellaneous screws and glue was about $10, for a grand total project cost of $146, taxes in. Well, there you go. A low-cost, easy-to-build, Montessori-inspired children's climbing gym wardrobe. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw, feel free to hit that like button. Even consider subscribing to the channel. Got a few other projects in the works and on the list, so the videos for those will be coming out in the next little while, so make sure to stay tuned for those. And if this is something that you want to try to tackle building, maybe now that you've seen this video, you feel like, well, if that guy can do it, I could surely build it. Let me know down below in the comments if you want me to release some plans for this. As I said, it's a fairly easy build. Clearly it's one that can be cost effective. This came in somewhere in the range of about 10% of what the cost it was to buy some of these other units, so definitely a project that you can tackle. And I've put the links for all the tools that I used throughout the build in the video description below. Thanks again for supporting the channel. Thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you on the next one.